And joining me now is Republican Senator James Lankford of Oklahoma. He's been taking the lead on finding the short-term congressional fix to the family separation issue. Senator Lankford, welcome back to Meet the Press, sir.
Thank you. Good to be back with you.
Let me start with just a basic question. Have we misnamed this? Is this more of a refugee crisis than an immigration crisis, considering this is a specific region of the world where this is emanating from?
Yeah, this has been a long-term issue. I'm not sure I'd call it a refugee crisis. Obviously, some would be able to target that, but it's been destabilizing for a long time. This is something the Obama administration saw as well. We started 3 years ago investing about $650 million into El Salvador, Honduras, and Guatemala to help provide some economic activity for them, to help provide some stabilizing force in their government, and to be able to provide them a reason to be able to stay. I've been in the region multiple times to be able to oversee how that money is being spent, but this is a long-term issue. You go back to 2013, right. There were about 15,000 families that were coming illegally into the United States as a family unit. Now we're up to 89,000 families a year that are coming at the United States as a family unit.
Let's go to some specifics here, because we haven't gotten a lot of answers from the Trump administration. Maybe you have gotten some of these answers. Maybe they're fulfilling their duty to at least let you know what's going on in Congress. Do you know how many of these kids that have been separated, how many of them are in shelters, how many of them are in detention facilities, and how many of them are already in foster care? Do you feel like we have a good idea of those three categories?
We do. Let me clarify this. We know where every single child is. This is an issue that's gone out there somewhat in some of the other media that's not been responsible for this, with the assumption that the administration's lost track of that. So let me clarify a couple of things. These are career professionals that work with HHS and that work with DHS and Customs and Border Patrol and ICE. These are not political appointees. These are career folks. They know where every child is to be able to connect them to their parent or the relative that came. Many of these children that came, we don't know if they're with a parent or not. And so trying to be able to make sure that we're connecting the dots on this. As you know, about of the 12,000 or so children that are out there total, 10,000 of those are unaccompanied minors, right, that came with no parent at all. And then you've got another 2,000 that are out there that came with a family member of some type. They're all in HHS custody, and they're trying to be able to reconnect them now. But HHS often puts them in foster care across several states because they can't handle the load on the southern border.
To be clear, though, while you said we know where every child is, that the government knows where every child is, the government, of the 2,300 that were separated from their parents, that the government has said, the number might be higher, we don't know, but of the 2,300 they've confirmed, do we know where those parents are? That's an unknown, correct? We don't know where all the parents are.
That is, well, it's a known of the adult they came with. So the child and the adult that they came with, we don't know if that is the parent. Oftentimes it's a parent that is somewhere in the country, oftentimes illegally as well. They came with another relative, and so trying to be able to connect the dots to see if we need to connect them with their parent that's already here in the country, connect them with a parent that may be in custody, going through procedures, whatever that may be. But yes, we do not be able to connect the people they came with as well.
And how does the reunification work? So the child, you identify the parent, the child, then what happens? Is the parent brought to where the child is? Is the child brought to where the parent is? Are they both sent to a separate facility? What can you tell us about that situation?
Yeah, it's a mixture of all of those, actually. We're trying to be able to work through the process to connect with the adult. Several of the adults are given some kind of ankle monitoring system, ankle bracelet, so it monitors them until they get to what's called a notice to appear hearing in the days ahead. As you put in your lead-in, which was very well done, the lead-in gave the problem. The Flores settlement from 1997 says that you can only hold that child for 20 days. It takes about 35 days to actually do a hearing. And so what the court set up in 1997 was this conundrum. You either have to release them if they come as a family into the country and hope they show up, or you can't keep them and actually go through a hearing on it. To be very clear, only 2% of the family units that come to the United States illegally actually go through and actually have the notice to appear, finish up with the notice of removal, and actually leave the country. So the family units that are coming here, 98% of them end up somewhere in the country, most of them illegally, because they never actually leave after they're given the responsibility for an order of removal.
Your congressional fix here, let's get into the Flores Amendment here in this 20-day conundrum, because the Trump administration is asking for relief from the courts. They're probably not going to get it because the Obama administration asked for the very same relief. They didn't get it either. You want to defund it. How is that going to make the matter easier to deal with? If you don't fund the Flores settlement, essentially, not allow any money to go to it, how is that going to help the situation? I'm a bit confused.
So let me give you three different options. One is to just say we don't fund it, to be able to do a pushback to the court to say we don't give the executive branch the ability to be able to operate this. We want to go back to the court and be able to resolve it. The next tier of it is to be able to change the dates on it, to say it's not 20 days, it's maybe 60 days where we can keep families together. That gives enough time to be able to actually get through a hearing, and so we keep families together the entire time to be able to do that. We've got to add additional judges, which we've asked for 225 additional judges across the country to be added for immigration. But ultimately, we've got to deal with Flores as a whole. The lowest level, what I'm trying to find is what's the lowest common denominator that's defunding it so we can actually make sure we function together. The best thing that we can do is actually try to reform it, and so that we actually keep families together, keep them there long enough that we can actually get through a proper hearing.
And are you in favor of using military bases to house these families? It appears that DHS has made a request to the Defense Department. Is that something you think is a good idea?
I do think that's a good idea because there are locations for that. President Obama used military bases in 2014 for unaccompanied minors. Some of those were in my home state in Oklahoma, which, by the way, members of Congress from my state tried to visit those facilities that are in my state where President Obama was holding his unaccompanied minors. They were turned away at the door and told that they could not come in. The same thing that's happening now. So some people try to say this is something new the Trump administration is doing, blocking people out. No, it's the exact same policy that HHS had before. We made an appointment. Then after we made an appointment, we're allowed to be able to go in and to go through that process. Should
that be the process, or should there be more transparency here? Do you feel as if the White House has been fully transparent with the American public about what they're trying to do here?
I don't, actually, and this has been one of the great frustrations. I think the White House has not been clear on how bad the Flores settlement is. They tried to say it and say it and say it. The challenge is you shouldn't just allow anyone to be able to come in at any time to be able to view a spot where there are children present. I think it's entirely reasonable. This has been HHS's policy for a long time to say, if you're going to come into a location where there's children, we need to know who you are, we need to know the background. We can't just trust if you show up with an ID that that's who that is, make an appointment. If you do that, you can get in to get a chance to see him as a member of Congress, just like I did during the time when President Obama had those children here in Oklahoma at a military base as well.
Senator, my final question for you is having to do with whether the president is creating more problems or if he's making this harder to solve by some of the rhetoric he's using. This is how he's described people coming across the border just this week, Senator. Take a listen.
They could be murderers and thieves. They endanger all of our children.
Millions of people flowing up and just overtaking the country. They're human traffickers, they're coyotes. I mean, we're getting some real beauties.
We want people in our country based on merit, not based on a draw, where other countries put their absolute worst in a bin and they start drawing people.
Do you believe that rhetoric demonizes immigrants and makes your job harder?
It does, actually, but the challenge of it is there is a percentage where the president is absolutely correct on that.
But what's the percentage? I mean, we're talking, the percentage is pretty small.
It is pretty small,
so
and that's the challenge.
Right. Go ahead. Sorry.
I would just say I would prefer the president would step out and say a lot of these are folks that are coming for economic reasons. They want to be able to flee into an area where they have greater economic opportunities. Every family wants to be able to see that for their family, but there are also some individuals that are there. On average, every day, DHS stops or interdicts 10 people that are on the terror watch list trying to come into the country. And so I have a real concern that we're demonizing law enforcement folks that really are trying to be able to do their job because there are very real threats. But the vast majority of these individuals are coming for economic reasons. That's why they're coming from Central America. They're not fleeing to Costa Rica or Belize or Ecuador, who also have great asylum laws. They're coming to the United States because they want to have the economic opportunities, not just asylum. They're trying to be able to come for economic gains, and I don't blame them for that. But to tell you the truth, 1.1 million people a year become citizens of the United States illegally, and 500,000 people a day cross legally into the United States from just the southern border. So this can be done legally, but the challenge is for those individuals, that is a much smaller number that are doing it illegally. How do you process that?
Senator Lankford, I'm going to leave it there. Thanks for coming on, sharing your views. Much appreciated.
Thank you.
President Trump addressing that massive migrant caravan as we learn negotiations are in progress with Mexico about how to handle any immigrants who reach the U.S. southern border. Senator James Lankford is a member of the Intelligence and Homeland Security Committees. He joins us now. Senator, how would you like to see this handled?
Well, I think actually President Trump is handling this the right way. He's working with the Honduran government, the Guatemalan government, the Mexican government to say you have individuals that are moving across your country that don't have legal status to move there. Please don't just let them move by just because they're making you aware that they're going to try to move to the United States and cross there illegally as well. The Guatemalan government has already returned 3,500 people that they have pulled out when they crossed from Honduras into Guatemala and trying to get into Mexico. Guatemalans have already returned 3,500 of those folks back to their country. So the Mexican government's helping us. Others are engaging. That's the right way to be able to handle it.
But the president has not ruled out the military option. He says this is still on the table, and he will throw all the resources at the border as it is needed. What do you expect to see happen there? And is it still good that the president's putting that on the table?
Sure it is. Yeah. What's interesting is I've had some Democratic colleagues say, I can't believe the president would call out the National Guard for this, forgetting that President Obama called out the National Guard during the unaccompanied minors, during that push that happened in 2013 and 14. So it's not uncommon. They're not there for law enforcement. The Customs and Border Patrol folks, the ICE folks, those are the law enforcement officers that are going to be able to take care of things. But the National Guard can come in a support role to what's happening in Customs and Border Patrol. It's been done many times before, should be done this time as well, if the need is there.
If we could just, Senator, step back and look at this more broadly, and I'll ask you the question: how did we get here? How did this all come to this point?
Yeah, this has been a growing issue for multiple years. Obviously, during the Obama administration, there was a greater openness to having people cross the border illegally, and then it started really spinning out of control that they didn't know how to be able to handle the unaccompanied minor issue when they had tens of thousands of individuals, 17 years old and younger, just coming to the border and saying we want access. Those individuals were then placed in the homes of people that are here in the country already illegally as sponsors. So they were reconnecting with families here, and that has just caused this rolling chain reaction. Now with so much of the media covering families coming in, if families cross the border they can get access to, it's created a push of individuals to come to our border. If you bring a child, then they have a perception that if I bring a child, I'm a family unit, I'm going to get into the United States for free, basically. And I can claim that I need asylum, but never actually apply for asylum. The vast majority of people that come to our border say they have credible fear or want to do an asylum claim, come across the border, are allowed to do that, but they never actually apply for asylum. And if they do, they never show up for their hearings.
Considering this is just days left till the midterm elections, how do you think the issue of immigration is going to play for your party?
You know, I would say it's always hard to be able to tell what the issue of the day will be as people decide, but I don't see a lot of people of either side of the political spectrum that say we should just have open borders. Some of my most liberal colleagues are very open to open borders. They want to abolish ICE. They want to say that anyone who wants to come to the United States should do that. But most people, that's not where they are. They think we should have secure borders. We should know who's coming in. We should allow people to be able to come in and to be able to work and return back to their home countries. But we should definitely know who they are. And that this is not just a run across the border and then I can come in and work when I want to kind of society. Never has been.
Can I ask you, Senator, sort of turning the page here, looking at the threats that we see across the country to some of your Democratic colleagues? Former Vice President Joe Biden now was targeted with one of these suspicious packages. Others sent to Hillary Clinton, the home of former President Barack Obama, Maxine Waters, and others. What are your thoughts this morning as we continue to learn more and we all pray that law enforcement is able to find whoever is responsible for this? But as we await that, what are you thinking as you see this play out?
No, it's atrocious. It's unacceptable for anyone to actually carry out acts of terrorism or violence to be able to put some sort of political message. And we don't know what the message is here, but clearly they're targeting individuals with pipe bombs that have a liberal point of view. That is not who we are as Americans. It wasn't appropriate last year when we had a man walk up to a baseball practice and say, is this where the Republicans are playing? And when they said yes, he opened fire and started shooting Republicans on a baseball field in Washington, D.C. It wasn't appropriate when they sent white powder to Ted Cruz's office to try to help intimidate him during the campaign time period. It's not appropriate now. It wasn't appropriate during the Kavanaugh hearings with people coming in screaming at people. This is not how we should handle our differences as Americans. As Americans, we will disagree on issues, but we should be able to talk it out and still receive each other as Americans, not try to threaten each other into silence.
In the wake of this, some of your Democratic colleagues have said that they have wished for a stronger response from President Trump. Some are even blaming him for this, Senator.
No, I don't think you can blame President Trump on it. Obviously, this is someone who's sick and deranged that is trying to be able to put some sort of threats out there and put these pipe bombs out. That's not healthy. That's not normal human behavior, to say the least. But trying to be able to blame President Trump is absurd in this process. We didn't try to run blame all Democrats when a shooter came to shoot Republicans at a baseball field to say all Democrats are to blame for this in their rhetoric. So that's uncalled for. But in realistic terms, we should be able to engage in healthy debate, but it shouldn't ever be personal and certainly shouldn't ever be violent.
Senator James Lankford, great to get you on this morning. Thank you.
Yeah, glad to be with you.
President Trump tweeting yesterday that he did not have tapes of his conversation. He himself did not have tapes with former FBI Director James Comey. Special Counsel Robert Mueller is still pushing forward with his probe of Russian meddling. Did you see that Fox was back on top for the week or whatever it was over at MSNBC because the Russian thing calmed down a little? So it actually, you wonder why. Anyway, meddling in the 2016 election. Joining us now, a man that was considered to replace Comey as FBI director, former Oklahoma Governor Frank Keating. He also previously served as the third-ranking official in the Justice Department under President Reagan. Governor, it's good to see you. How close do you think you came to getting what Chris Wray is finally chosen for?
Well, I think that was a solid choice. I've got to say, Andrew, it's kind of fun to be in the church, even though you're not at the altar. But it was a pretty intense roundtable. The vice president, the attorney general, whom I served with, by the way, as U.S. attorney in Oklahoma, Jeff Sessions, and of course, the president at the head of the table. So
Governor, I'm going to choose to take that as a compliment. It's actually not Andrew.
It's Joe.
You probably get,
but it was a compliment, Governor. So we appreciate
I'll take that as a compliment.
I apologize. Okay.
When he does ask a question, it'll probably be very clear that it's him. The question that he finally asked. But let me ask you: do you think? I mean, Mueller and Comey are like BBFs, aren't they? Is this going to be okay? Is this going to be a fair? Knowing what special counsels or prosecutors have done in the past, where could this end up? This could end up anywhere, couldn't it?
Well, that's true. You really don't know. I have never been friendly to special counsels, independent counsels, special prosecutors, whatever you want to call them. The average length of these investigations is 3 years. In the case of Whitewater, and they talked to me about being the Whitewater counsel, and I was running for governor of Oklahoma, and Jamie Gorelick, who was the Deputy Attorney General, said, well, that won't work. But the reality is that thing started in '94 and ended in 2002. So these never end. And I think it's bad policy, it's bad justice, it's un-American to have one prosecutor with a staff and one victim. I don't care how prominent or how ordinary the victim is. That ought to be the responsibility of the Congress and or a grand jury. But independent counsels, special prosecutors, I think are un-American and a big mistake.
Do you think that at this point, if no collusion is found, and everybody's waiting, it's been a while, but maybe there still is something, maybe there isn't. But let's say there isn't, just for argument's sake, I don't want to disappoint half of our audience that wants there to be collusion so badly. But let's say there's not. Then is that still okay to go for obstruction, even if there was no crime you were covering up in the first place?
Well, see, Joe, that's the problem. I guarantee if you were my only defendant and I had a staff of investigators, I'd find something. It may end up jaywalking, but look at the Whitewater case. They went after the president for a real estate deal, and they ended up with a stained dress.
I know.
And, okay, I mean, I understand that, but the reality is it's just not fair to the subject of an investigation to have all of the resources of the U.S. government on them. They're going to get them eventually for something, and that's what really worries me here.
Do you think that that Mueller would go and look at Loretta Lynch? You think that all is under the same in unmasking and all this other stuff? And yesterday was kind of interesting. We heard about the server that was never turned over because Jay Johnson said that we didn't want to look like we were aiding either investigation. And then Trey Gowdy immediately said maybe there's something else on that server that was the real reason that it was in the best interest never to really look at it. I mean, will Mueller get into all this stuff?
Well, I mean, theoretically it never ends, but practically in a council such as the Mueller appointment, the Attorney General can say enough. I'm going to turn down your recommendation for prosecution. He can do that, but how far it goes before he does that is anybody's guess. I mean, there are many different varieties and shapes and sizes of special counsels, independent counsels, special prosecutors. But
Governor,
the
what do you
structure
think,
itself is not American.
Governor, in the context of the investigation about this administration, given that the judge and jury is effectively our Congress, what do you think it would take in terms of a surprise? I don't know if it would be a surprise, but something that you would hear that would be so disturbing that we'd actually be talking about impeachment?
Oh, who knows? I mean, the reality is, when you have relations with a country like Russia, no matter how difficult those people are, no matter how thuggish their behavior frequently is, when you have relations with them, you're always going to have them searching you out, and you'll search them out for guidance, advice, information, and the like. But to criminalize that conduct, that's what's a mistake here, to criminalize conduct that is casual. In the president's case, quite truthfully, here's a layman probably not knowing the casual things he says to someone could be looked at with icicle eyes by a prosecutor. I mean, again, this just worries me as a citizen. I have no role in any of this. I'm just concerned as a citizen at the process. I mean, you have Bob Mueller, obviously, is the mentor to Jim Comey. You know, who is the protege to Comey? Who reported to Comey? The new selectee for the FBI. So all of these people are stair steps. And I just think it's so important to have independent judgment, independent analysis, and that's what can be done by Congress, both parties, or by a grand jury in the process that we expect as citizens.
Right.
But again, as I said, one product, one investigation, one defendant, it's not good.
You were not, Governor, just ask Andrew, you were not at the New York Times yesterday, were you?
I was not.
Okay.
No.
No, because there's a picture of Comey. I guess Comey was visiting some friends over there at you saw the picture of him walking into the New York.
I don't believe that would be friends, but I'm sure that he might have
you
walked
weren't there,
in
so he wasn't specifically meeting with you.
He was not meeting with me.
Okay, just wondering on that. You know, and then there's somebody else that thinks that maybe Comey is in jeopardy because he said that he wasn't responsible for any of the previous leaks, although he did cop to the leak to the guy at Columbia. The law professor, obviously, but there
was a question.
Was he under oath though? Was that under oath? Saying
Yes, Comey was under oath.
He was under oath.
Yes, he was under oath for that. And,
Okay,
and that's
so-
why people say he would tell everything that had happened with any of those issues.
Weird.
Well, it's
I
so
feel like
unprofessional to leak information like that.
Right.
To
So it's
have
the
a
FBI
result
director.
that
Even
you want
if
as
he's
an
a private
investigator.
citizen,
That's wrong.
A private citizen
for
leaking his own notes
for a week.
by the way.
Yeah,
Private citizen leaking his own notes, which weren't
He's a private
classified.
citizen for a
Which
week.
weren't classified.
Disappointment.
But Joe, I think that you've turned this around away from the president and the administration. That's not to suggest that everything that Comey did was perfect either, or frankly that Hillary Clinton did. But I think ultimately, in Governor, you at some level, I imagine you're disturbed if there was tampering in this election, and specifically if the president, with intent, tried to get rid of this investigation. No?
Well, it really depends on what the task is. The Congress can investigate that. A grand jury can investigate that. Mueller will investigate that. And it will be years before the process is ultimately ended. But I think, you know, the fact is prosecution isn't forever. There are statutes of limitations. And as I said, one victim, one prosecutor, and a huge staff, you'll get your man. I mean, you walked into the woods with a whole armada of weapons. You're going to get a deer before you walk out. And all of that just worries me structurally. There's just so much fizz and fury in the air. We ought to focus on facts and facts alone.
Andrew, if there
Joe
was-
Friday ought to have his day.
If it turns out there was no collusion between any Trump associates and Russia, then do you think if he does find something somewhere else, is that okay, the special counsel?
Well,
Depends what he finds. I mean, it depends where he finds it.
So it's as broad as this, whatever's there.
Well, look, we've talked.
I mean, I think if there's no collusion, they ought to close the investigation. It's
No,
over.
but that's not gonna be the way
to
it
go on
works.
to
Even if the
something else, here we
investigation,
go.
even if the president tried to quash the investigation, because look, there's lots of times in the world where the underlying supposed crime doesn't exist, but when you're being investigated, you can't try to end the
even with Watergate, there was a break-in. There has to be some original crime. You can't just have no crime. And what are you covering up?
That's actually completely not true,
All
by the
right.
way.
Well, good.
That's what you talk about the rule of law.
Then you'll be able to find. Then
you talk about the rule of law.
Then you'll be able to find. That's Governor Keating's point.
Right.
You can find every man. Show me a man, I'll show you a crime. That was,
It was a
one of
Russian
Stalin's
Secret
guys.
Service guy.
We're back to the Russians. Maybe I'm conflicted. Anyway, Governor, thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks for appearing today. All right.
Republican Senator James Lankford of Oklahoma is a member of the Senate Intelligence Committee. It is one of the congressional panels investigating Russia's meddling in the 2016 election. He joins us from Oklahoma City. Senator, good morning.
Good morning.
Where is your investigation, and who do you expect to call next?
Well, I won't say who we're calling next. We're pretty thorough in our investigation. We've already done about 36 witnesses already, and we'll continue to be able to work through the process consistently. We do have documents, as you just mentioned, from Michael Flynn that we're working through. We did initial subpoena of his personal records. His attorneys pushed back on that. We then went and subpoenaed his business records. We're getting those, and we're working through the process to get some of the personal records as well.
And
we're
what are
going
you
to go
looking
wherever
for?
the facts go. That's been the key thing.
What are you looking for
wherever the
from
facts go? Well, I would say we've got 3 key areas. Obviously, the most obvious one is what did the Russians do to try to interfere in our election? The second one is, was there any American that was involved in helping the Russians in their meddling into our election? The third one deals with classified documents and the leaking of those classified documents. So the FBI has an investigation. They're working on criminal probes. We're working on oversight of the FBI investigation, making sure they're seeing every document. They're going through everything thoroughly. We also have policy decisions that we've got to work through long term for the nation. So there's obviously a House investigation, Senate investigation, FBI investigation. We deconflict all the time between the 3 to make sure we're not stepping on each other, but we also are running independently.
You know, there are reports about Jared Kushner that he set up a back channel, that he wanted to set up back channel communications with Russia. And there are some calls for his security clearance to be reviewed. What do you think about that?
I think the security clearance has been reviewed. I think we'll work through the process to get the rest of the facts on it. We're asking all those same questions, and we'll work through the process together and work to be able to get direct information from him.
Do you think he should continue to have security clearance? Back last year when Hillary Clinton's security clearance, you called for her security clearance to be revoked while she was under investigation.
It was a very different type of investigation. We were dealing with classified documents that had been moved to someone's home versus an accusation to be able to have a conversation with someone during a transition time.
Do you see anything inappropriate about Jared Kushner trying to set up back-channel communications with the Russians?
Yeah, we're trying to find out more of why for that. Again, the first question is, yes, it's entirely appropriate to be able to have communications with every government, especially the larger governments like Russia and China and others, to have some sort of ongoing communication. We're trying to figure out exactly why, for him in particular, was the reason to have back channel. It's one thing to have national security back channel. It's another thing for other individuals in the White House. So that's a very reasonable question. We're going to look to try to get clear answers.
And should you be doing it before you're in fact president and a senior advisor to a president who's already taken office?
Well, I think that's not a problem, actually. You know, I would expect every White House, while they're setting up and getting prepared, they're trying to develop the relationships and the conversations that they will have once the actual administration begins. You don't want anyone calling someone the very first day on January the 20th and saying, "Hi, my name is," we need to set up some sort of system and process. The difference in this one is it seems to be a back channel communication separate from normal communications. That's part of the question. But we should have ongoing communication, Senator, State Department, White House, others with multiple entities.
Senator, what bothers you most about all of this in terms of what you have seen and what you have heard and what you have read? What it is that bothers you?
Well, I would tell you there are several things that bother me. Number one is the Russians wanted to interfere in our election, and they seem to have created quite a stir and a chaos across the country. That was actually their initial mission, was to try to destabilize our democracy like they've worked to destabilize so many other democracies around the world. Second thing is, if there is any American that is engaging with a foreign power to try to affect our elections, that's a real problem. And so as those accusations come up, we've got to clear them up, both for the sake of the president and the president. presidency, well, we've got to be able to resolve this issue long term and get the facts out. Right now, there are so many unnamed sources and so many accusations in so many places. This creates instability and churn in the United States. We need to get this resolved. And so for me, I'm glad that there's an independent counsel working directly with the FBI. I was concerned there'd be a separate independent counsel that would take much longer. Like you can recall the time during the Reagan administration, that was 6 years of an independent counsel. Let's keep moving on this. Let's get the actual facts out and let's get it resolved.
All right, Senator Langford, thank you very much for joining us this morning.
You bet. Thank you.
And ESPN's Jessica Mendoza, an Olympic gold medal winning softball player, joins us from Oklahoma City, where she's working the Women's College World Series. Good morning, Jessica.
Good morning, Michael. Baseball is America's pastime, and as summer approaches, youth baseball is getting underway for millions of kids from coast to coast. More serious injuries like reconstructive elbow surgery used to be seen in college and pro athletes, but now with a recent study, nearly 60% of Tommy John surgeries are at the high school level, some kids as young as 13 years old. And there are three main ways, according to the American Sports Medicine Institute, that we can prevent this. One is if you're tired, if you feel that pain in your elbow or shoulder, stop. The whole idea of playing through it, don't do it. The second is when you think about overhand throwing, take 2 to 3 months a year, sometimes even 4 months, and just don't throw overhand, whether it's baseball, football, go climb a tree, go have fun. And the third is making sure that you're not trying to light up the radar gun. I feel like this is the biggest one, that max effort. You're 9, 10, 11 years old. What happened just the purity of playing catch and not trying to throw the ball as hard as you can?
Well, you know what, Jessica, it's kind of like how much do you bench? You know, it's just it's just a challenging thing for most kids out there. And you're the mother, you're also a coach of a little leaguer. So what are the biggest challenges that the parents of these kids face?
I'm going through it right now. I mean, this is so close to home for me. And when you think about it, it's the pressure versus the love of the game. Get the kids out there and having fun and not just out there trying to get a pro scholarship.
All right.
You three get to our guest, who is Michelle Malkin. She's the senior editor at the Conservative Review and host of Michelle Malkin Investigates on CRTV.com. Michelle, nice to see you this morning.
Good morning.
Merry Christmas.
And early Merry Christmas and joy to the world to all of you. Yes.
Well, Hillary Clinton talking about this fake news. Obviously, you've been in the news business for a long time as a journalist, and you look through you aggregate a lot of different news over the years on your websites and so forth. What do you make of Hillary Clinton's comments on fake news? We'll play that and get your response.
Yeah. The epidemic of malicious fake news and false propaganda that flooded social media over the past year, it's now clear that so-called fake news can have real-world consequences. This isn't about politics or partisanship. Lives are at risk. It's a danger that must be addressed and addressed quickly. Bipartisan legislation is making its way through Congress to boost the government's response to foreign propaganda, and Silicon Valley is starting to grapple with the challenge and threat of fake news.
So, Michelle, legislation to combat fake news. What do you make of that?
Yeah, well, that smacks of the very kind of quote-unquote fascism that all of these Trump bashers have been decrying since the election. I would file that speech under chutzpah on stilts, because the world's foremost fake news provider, Hillary Clinton, Miss Fake, blame a YouTube video on Benghazi, having the sanctimony to lecture anybody else about false information and the consequences, bloody consequences thereof, is really occupying a bubble of unreality. But what we have here, of course, is a tactic. And it's a tactic that I have experienced for the last 25 years.
Right, you were speaking out about this, Michelle, right, since the early 90s.
Yes, that's exactly right, Abby, because as someone who has had a foot in old media and new media, it's clear that these people are threatened by alternative news sources that are taking away and diminishing their power. That certainly was a referendum of this past election. It wasn't just a referendum on establishment politics. It was a referendum on establishment media, and these people lost.
Michelle, how far would they go if they could with this fake news idea and suppressing voices they don't want to hear?
Well, look, we just had 8 years of an Obama administration where there were witch hunts against ideological enemies and certainly even members of the press who were targeted. Ask some people who, have been independent bloggers about how they have been persecuted and even prosecuted. And this is why we're doing what we're doing at CRTV.com, where I have a new investigative show. Yeah, we're actually committing real journalism. That's why I'm here in Oklahoma covering a case of a former police officer who was witch hunted by a social justice mob, and nobody here in the local media wants to talk about it. Being an independent journalist, which, yes, we're going to be smeared as being a purveyor of quote-unquote fake news because it's real news, you're asking questions that make people uncomfortable, and that's what Hillary Clinton and her minions want to marginalize.
Well, we like comfort. That's the reason, Michelle. We got and things are getting a little uncomfortable right now at the Energy Department because of a new questionnaire that is causing the liberal media to freak out. I'm going to put up some headlines about this questionnaire that's being sent around by the Trump transition team to the Energy Department workers, asking them, about climate and climate change. Trump's team demands fuel fear of Energy Department witch hunt. Trump team memo on climate change alarms Energy Department staff. If they've ever gone to climate change conferences or anything like that, they have to answer those types of questions. What do you make of this?
Oh, look at that. It's the snowflakes and buttercups up in arms because Trump won. And he has the prerogative and privilege of making sure that people work for him actually agree with his views. This gives me a lot of comfort because, of course, when Donald Trump was meeting with Al Gore, some among the common sense free market environmental movement were a little bit worried, but they're putting the pedal to the metal here, and they have every right and privilege to do this. I would remind people, I have a long memory, I wrote Culture of Corruption in 2009, that the Obama administration itself was very responsible for kicking people out, firing them, pushing out people who dared to air any dissent on the climate change issue. Ask Alan Carlin, who was a senior researcher at the EPA, who basically was muzzled because he was calling attention to the outdated data that the liberal EPA was using to justify massive regulations that would cost businesses and taxpayers huge amounts of money.
Well, yeah, I mean, in any department, that's what the bureaucracy counts on, is the long-term staff, whether they agree with who's in charge, a few appointees or not, the ability to subvert things they don't agree with. Is this type of thing common, and should it be used more widely?
Of course it is. I mean, if you can't ideologically vet your own administration, what's the point of winning? I certainly hope that they're doing this with every single agency and every nook and cranny of the Obama administration to drain that swamp.
Yeah, you wonder if this was even done in this administration. It would never be really reported on, or people wouldn't be angry about it.
No, because unfortunately, Michelle, as you know, people take the bureaucracy and the, sort of the fourth branch of government that's become our bureaucracy, in some ways has become lockstep with the Democratic Party, believing in more government. That becomes a long-term problem.
And only a few hundred people are replaced at these jobs. The thousands and thousands that actually stay there for life. And it'd be good to know.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
You've got these entrenched civil servants who are the ones in charge of policy instead of the president himself. And now things are going to change, and they are not happy about it.
And you are smiling.
Joined now by Senator James Lankford. He's the only senator on both the Intelligence Committee and the Homeland Security Committees. Senator, great to have you with us. Appreciate it.
Very glad to be with you again.
To the issue that Congressman McCall is talking about, and we've heard from a number of people, including the Republican nominee, saying her security clearances should be taken away. I know you feel the same way. What is the likelihood, and how likely is it could happen?
So apparently, if you have a different last name or a name Clinton rather than Robinson or Jones or Smith, then you have a different set of rules. And that's the big issue here. Typically, if someone's under investigation for a security violation, putting classified information at risk, you would lose your security clearance during that investigation. That hasn't happened to Huma Abedin. That hasn't happened to Cheryl Mills. Hasn't happened to Secretary Clinton. There's a different set of rules here. All I'm asking for is the same set of rules to apply to Secretary Clinton and her staff as applies to, let's say, James Cartwright or to other individuals that lost their clearance during the investigation time. That should be a minimum standard. Then we'll get a chance to press on to be able to actually do a real investigation.
the reference to a 4-star General James Cartwright, the senator mentioning, who is being held accountable for lying in an investigation, presumably to protect national security. Let's turn, if we may, to the issue of these investigations that are underway. It's being played out in public. We understand the dissension. We're watching the result of some of that within the FBI itself, within the Justice Department, with the FBI. This is an extraordinary moment. You sit on these two committees. What can be done here to say to a different party in power, this is not going to go very well if you continue on this path of obstructing both justice and interfering in securing the national safety?
Everyone who lived through it or knows their history well knows in Watergate, it wasn't the break-in that was the problem. It was the cover-up that was the problem. It was using official resources and people within the government to be able to cover up something that had already occurred. When we hear stories of the FBI, 4 different field offices in 4 different parts of the country, all have evidence of issues and want to be able to open up an investigation on the Clinton Foundation and seeing this pay-to-play that's happening. Another investigation that's unrelated to that, getting information that also shows this, trying to push that up to Washington, D.C., and suddenly the Department of Justice and other parts of the FBI office in D.C. pushing it back and saying, no, we're going to drop this, we're going to drop this. That's a problem. Even when the State Department today drops out some emails and says, look, here's new emails, and none of these are classified, it's trying to be able to shift the message to say, hey, we've got them all out, none of these are classified. That's completely unrelated, and they know it. They're trying to confuse the American electorate, and it seems they're engaging in electioneering rather than just trying to get the investigation out and do it right.
Honestly, Senator, I'd be satisfied if they were engaging in electioneering. But they look like they're waging a psychological warfare against the American people when they put out an assistant attorney general whose best friend at least seems to be John Podesta, the head of the Clinton campaign, and says he will be the face of the Justice Department in this email scandal investigation to the U.S. Congress and Senate. I mean, this is pretty heavy lifting, I would guess, for all of you watching this kind of arrogance.
It does, actually. And the difficult part is not just the election, it's the long-term effect on it. It's very clear that Hillary Clinton put her political future ahead of America's national security. But now we also have the FBI being drug in. Long-term, that has real effects on the FBI being able to be non-biased, be nonpartisan, and to be a reliable entity that the American people can say when the FBI makes a decision, does an investigation, it can be trusted.
Yeah, I would even add, Senator, that the short term has already been extraordinarily costly to the the Bureau's image, as well as the personal pain, those individual agents who've had the courage to stand up against political power within both the FBI and the Justice Department. Let me turn to this business of 5 agencies, presumably of foreign intelligence operations hacking in to the email scandal. We heard all sorts of things about 17 intelligence groups saying that they could swear that all of this WikiLeaks was being sourced from Russia. That was knocked down by the New York Times. What can you tell us, and can you tell us how it is that agencies, even in the abstract, and particularly James Clapper, the NDI, got their names associated with what turned out to be not true in the most recent reporting of the Times, at least?
So this is a very loose accusations and loose reporting by the Clinton administration. You remember immediately after all the decisions came out from Jim Comey, they said, well, they've exonerated us, we're all clean, when that is not at all what James Comey said at all about Hillary Clinton. He said she was extremely careless and multiple things they wouldn't push through in prosecution. Same type of loose wording that Hillary Clinton is using right now to say this is clear, this is evidence of this. All that the WikiLeaks does is really shows how loose and how open these servers are. If all of this information can be found by WikiLeaks,
a higher standard of the public's right to know in this country than has the entire left-wing national media.
Well, and she said that her server was protected because there was a security guard around her server early on. You can
I'm really
remember that
asking,
one.
Senator, about how these agencies allowed themselves to be associated with the claim that Russia was the origin of that material.
Well, I'll allow the agencies to be able to speak on that one directly. I don't get into how they do the classification process. I would tell you, whenever we find out any kind of information, they start going backwards, trying to identify exactly where it came from. Oftentimes that's incredibly difficult, but sometimes there are distinct markers that are left by individuals that hack into systems.
But apparently there's some confusion about why there was suddenly such unanimity of view on this one and so little knowledge about what has happened to everything from the hack against the Office of Personnel Management, in which they took 33 million, as you know, 33 million names and data files from former and current federal employees. Senator, as always, great to have you with us. Come back soon. Senator James Langford.
Republican Congressman Tom Cole, what do you think? Because this is a man of principle and a friend of the show. Congressman Cole, what is the answer to that question?
What question?
Well, how does Paul Ryan explain to his kids if you're not a part of the problem?
He's the leader.
Yeah.
He is the leader of the Republican Party in the House of Representatives. His principal job is to preserve that majority and to advance its agenda. And I think that's exactly what he's doing. You can't have a general election where you've got a speaker at war with the presidential nominee of his own party. And frankly, you know, let's look at Hillary Clinton here a little bit. My gosh, she was on television last week telling you things that you know were not true about the Inspector General report on her own activity. Let's look at her tenure as Secretary of State. It was a debacle. Libya, a Russian reset that leads to the relitigation of borders in Eastern Europe, you know, the reestablishment of a terrorist state in the heart of the Middle East, a retreat from Iraq that was premature. We're now back there. You know, look, I think he can't embrace Hillary Clinton. He did what professionals do. He respected the choice of the voters of his own party. You know, he made it clear that he had some concerns. He worked through those concerns with the nominee, and he issued an endorsement. I think it's really pretty simple. He did the right thing.
Congressman, we are all admiring your rhetorical moves here around the table, very skillful. But let's get back to Paul Ryan. How much pressure internally do you think, or do you know, existed within the House GOP caucus on the Speaker to endorse Donald Trump?
I think the Speaker, there's certainly some pressure to do that. On the other hand, you've got some other individual members that probably won't do that, and that's fine. But the vast majority of the Republican Party would expect the Republican Speaker to endorse the Republican nominee. For goodness sakes, he has to preside over that convention. How can he do that without having, you know, committed to support the person that convention's going to nominate? I mean, I think when you don't have any choices, you do the right thing. And that's what he did here. And there's not an alternative out there. And frankly, again, this is a choice. It's a choice between Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump at this point. And frankly, if you're a Republican, that's a pretty easy choice. There's nobody that unites and motivates Republicans quite as much as Hillary Clinton.
Congressman, if you could wave a wand over Donald Trump and change either two of his positions or two of the ways he's conducting himself in this campaign, what would you change?
You know, first of all, I can't wave a wand, so I don't spend a lot of time worrying about what I can't do. But what I would advise him to do, number one, is move more toward a general election mode. If I had to pick a particular position that concerned me the most, it would be the ban on Muslims. I think it's clearly, you know, unconstitutional. It's ill-advised. It would really hurt the United States. We need a lot from friends to deal with what we're dealing with overseas, and we have some great Muslim friends, and we ought to recognize that and be sensitive. So I think maybe being a little bit more nuanced in how you address things would be good advice for any candidate.
What specific policy or direction do you like about Donald Trump?
I like the emphasis on tax reform. I like the emphasis on less regulation. Frankly, I think this has been a disastrous 8 years, and the idea that we would extend it, just the whole emphasis on change, frankly, is welcome for me. And Hillary Clinton's running as a status quo candidate. She's running as President Obama's third term. Those are her words. So you're not going to get much change in direction with her, and I think if you're a Republican, you desperately want to change in direction.
Congressman Tom Cole, thank you very much.